Welcome to the Deep Dive. And wow, you've really given us a stack this time. I mean, the sources you sent over are, well, they're incredibly ambitious, intellectually speaking.
They really are. It's quite the mix. We've got Rudolf Steiner's deep esoteric philosophy sitting right next to mid-20th century UFO contactee stuff like George Van Tassel.
Right. And then woven through that, there's esoteric alchemy, biblical prophecy from Revelation, no less, and even cutting-edge paleoanthropology, looking at, Neanderthal DNA.
It definitely looks like a wild collage at first glance. Like, how do these pieces even fit together? They seem like completely incompatible fields just sort of smashed together.
Exactly. But that's our job today, isn't it? Our mission here is to dig deep and see if we can actually pull out a single common thread, a core principle that maybe unites all these seemingly disparate ideas.
That's the goal. We're hunting for that overarching pattern, something that links, believe it or not, Venusian visitors, Neanderthals, the biblical Nephilim, and this whole idea of a global awakening or transformation.
We think, based on the material you provided, that there is such a pattern. A universal archetype, really, describing how consciousness evolves or constantly follow a three-part rhythm.
Yeah, a kind of descent, then a challenge or struggle, and finally an awakening or integration. That seems to be the core cycle.
So to suggest that key comes from esoteric philosophy, specifically from Rudolf Steiner.
Right. Steiner gives us this really sophisticated three-part model. It's not just good versus evil. It's more dynamic than that.
Okay, let's unpack Steiner's triad then. He talks about three core forces: Lucifer-Ahriman, and Christ. And we need to be clear right up front, this isn't the simple Sunday school version.
Absolutely not. Forget simple moral labels. Steiner uses these terms to describe fundamental evolutionary forces, almost like cosmic tendencies. It's a mechanism for how things change and grow.
And you mentioned it maps onto a classic philosophical structure.
Perfectly. It aligns directly with the Hegelian dialectic. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The idea is that for evolution, for real progress, you need these two opposing forces, the thesis and the antithesis, pushing against each other.
And then the third force, the synthesis, doesn't destroy them, but actually mediates between them, right? It finds a balance.
Precisely. It integrates them into something higher. So human evolution, according to this model, isn't about picking a side between the two extremes. It's about finding that synthesizing path forward, guided by that third principle.
Okay, so let's break down the players. Lucifer is the thesis, the starting impulse. What qualities does Steiner give Lucifer beyond just the light bringer idea?
Lucifer represents the push towards pure spirit, boundless freedom, radical imagination, think expansion, visionary leaps, the urge to transcend all limitations. It's that fire of inspiration, the drive for total autonomy.
Almost like the spirit wanting to leap free of the body entirely.
Exactly. It pulls upward, you could say. Away from restriction, away from form. But, and this is crucial, the sources are very clear that this unchecked freedom has a downside, a big one.
It becomes destructive if taken too far.
Absolutely. The Luciferic extreme cuts us off from grounded reality. It leads to illusion, spiritual arrogance, maybe utopian dreams that completely ignore the practicalities of life. Steiner even warned about a kind of digital delusion, being lost in purely abstract or virtual realms.
So it offers this amazing spark of freedom, but it risks floating away into fantasy. It loses its connection to the earth, so to speak.
Right. It lacks grounding. So if Lucifer is that upward, airy, expansive pull, the thesis, then you need a counterforce, an antithesis, and that's Ahriman.
Ahriman. Okay, so if Lucifer is spirit, Ahriman must be matter.
Pretty much. Ahriman represents the pull towards cold, hard materiality. Think rigid structure, computation, logic taken to its extreme. It binds consciousness to the physical, the measurable, the technological.
So discipline, scientific materialism, focusing only on what you can prove and quantify.
Exactly. Ahriman pushes for concrete reality, for order, for control. It's the force that builds systems, economies, technologies. It wants everything locked down and defined.
And the danger there seems just as obvious, but in the opposite direction. Total spiritual suffocation.
Yes. The Ahrimanic extreme crushes the spirit under the weight of materialism. It leads to things like domination, seeing humans as just biological machines, reducing everything to data. If Lucifer says only imagination is real, Ahriman says only matter is real.
Wow. That's a powerful clash. The fire of inspiration versus the ice of pure structure, freedom versus limitation.
And that's where the synthesis comes in. In Steiner's model, that mediating, integrating principle is Christ.
So Christ isn't just another entity in this framework, but the active principle of balance, the force that holds Lucifer and Ahriman in a dynamic tension.
Precisely. The Christ principle is what allows humanity to navigate between these two necessary extremes without being destroyed by either. It's about integrating the fire of Luciferic inspiration with the discipline and grounding of Ahrimanic reality.
So it's not about rejecting matter or spirit, but finding a way to, what? Elevate matter, infuse it with spirit.
That's the idea. Spiritualizing matter, raising consciousness within the material world, not by escaping it or submitting to it. This concept of mediation and integration is absolutely key to understanding everything else we're going to talk about.
Okay, that makes sense as a philosophical foundation. Now, how do we bridge this seemingly abstract triad to something like, well, UFOs and ancient myths?
We look at the stories themselves. And the most striking modern example you provided is George Van Tassel's narrative from the 1950s. It's fascinating how his specific claims, especially when interpreted by later commentators like Jason Giorgiani, seem to almost perfectly act out this Steinerian triad.
Van Tassel, he was the guy out at Giant Rock in the Mojave Desert, right? Claiming contact with the Venusians.
That's him. He described these telepathic contacts with beings he often called Nordics or Venusian colonists, and his story unfolds in a very specific sequence, a two-part arrival that looks remarkably like Thesis and Antithesis, leading towards a synthesis.
Okay, let's break down that sequence. The first descent. How does that parallel Lucifer, the Thesis?
According to Van Tassel's accounts, the very first group to arrive from Venus were exclusively male. They were like pioneers, explorers. But apparently they struggled to set up a stable spiritual community on Earth and ended up, well, mating with the native Earth hominins of the time, often described as robust ape-men types.
And this created the first hybrid lineage.
Yes. And right away, you can see the Luciferic parallel. This brilliant, advanced spiritual force, the Venusians, descends, maybe too quickly, gets entangled with the raw, untamed materiality of early Earth hominins.
Lacking the proper grounding, like we discussed with Lucifer.
Exactly. The sources often frame this act as a kind of original sin or fall. Not necessarily evil, but an imperfect integration. The resulting hybrids had immense strength, maybe great potential, but they were also volatile, perhaps aggressive. It was the initial, powerful, but untamed spiritual seed landing on Earth.
Okay, so that's the Thesis, powerful but unstable. Then there must have been a reaction, a correction, the antithesis.
That's the second part of Van Tassel's story. The Venusians back home supposedly realized this first lineage was too wild, too unbalanced, maybe too materialistic or destructive. So they sent a second wave to Earth.
And this wave was different.
Critically different. This group included Venusian women. Their specific purpose was to stabilize the situation, to bring balance and reintroduce a more harmonious spiritual element. And crucially, these Venusian women reportedly mated with Earthmen, creating a second distinct hybrid lineage.
A lineage often equated with the emergence of us, Homo sapiens.
That's the connection often made, yes. This second wave brings the grounding, the adaptability, the intellectual capacity needed to balance out that initial fiery male impulse. It acts like the Ahrimanic principle, providing necessary structure and stability.
Okay, I have to jump in here. Because attributing the volatile spirit to the male arrival and the grounding correction to the female arrival, that sounds potentially problematic, right? Like it's leaning into some pretty old and potentially limiting gender stereotypes. How do the sources handle that interpretation?
That's a really important point to raise. The sources that delve into this, particularly the Giorgiani interpretation, tend to treat the male and female aspects symbolically, not just literally biologically. The male Venusian impulse is seen as representing the active, outward-pushing, seeding force, the Luciferic expansion.
Okay.
Whereas the female Venusian impulse represents the receptive, structuring, nurturing quality needed for that initial spark to actually take root and develop stably. Think of it like the structure needed to contain the fire. It's more like the ancient philosophical concepts of yang, active, and yin, receptive, providing the necessary counterbalance for integration.
All right, so it's framed functionally rather than as a statement about inherent qualities of biological sex. That makes more sense in this context. So the first wave is Thesis. The second is Antithesis. What's the synthesis?
The synthesis is us, modern humanity. According to this narrative, we are the result of the eventual intermingling of both of these Venusian human hybrid lines. We carry the legacy of both descents.
So we're the third lineage, the ultimate hybrid, supposedly integrating the creativity and fire of the first wave with the grounding and wisdom of the second.
That's the idea. It's a mythological echo of the Christic synthesis, the attempt to harmonize these powerful opposing cosmic forces within our very being.
And what's really wild is that this seemingly modern, almost sci-fi story from the 50s It's basically retelling a much, much older story.
It really is. It resonates incredibly strongly with the account in Genesis chapter 6, the story of the sons of God coming down and mating with the daughters of men.
The Nephilim story.
Exactly. Genesis 6:1-4 describes the Ben Elohim, usually translated as sons of God, maybe angelic beings who saw that human women were beautiful and took them as wives, and their offspring were the Nephilim.
And that word Nephilim is usually translated as giants.
That's the common translation, yeah. It comes largely from the Greek Septuagint translation, which use the word gigantes. But the original Hebrew root nephal actually means to fall. So Nephilim really means something closer to the fallen ones.
Fallen ones. That implies a descent, doesn't it? A fall from a higher state.
Precisely. It suggests these beings weren't just large, but represented a mixing or a corruption, a divine or celestial essence becoming entangled, maybe falling into mortal flesh. The result was beings of extraordinary power and size, but perhaps spiritually compromised. An imperfect synthesis, like the first Venusian wave.
Okay, so the Nephilim represent this powerful, maybe flawed, initial hybrid lineage in the ancient biblical context. How does this connect back to, well, to actual bones and fossils?
This is where the speculation gets really interesting. The sources suggest that the memory of the Nephilim, these imposing giants or fallen ones, might have been symbolically inspired by encounters with another real hominin group, the Neanderthals.
Because Neanderthals were around at the same time as early Homo sapiens, and they were built differently.
Very differently. They were significantly more robust. Thicker bones, heavier musculature, a distinct barrel chest, different skull shape. To the more lightly built Homo sapiens who were expanding into their territories in Europe and Asia, Neanderthals could have seemed incredibly imposing, almost giant-like in comparison.
So the Nephilim myth could be a kind of cultural echo, a symbolic way of remembering encounters with this other powerful, coexisting human population.
That's the speculative leap. It frames the ancient myth not just as pure fantasy, but as potentially encoding a memory of a real biological and cultural interaction. It reinforces that idea from the Van Tassel narrative. Yeah. The first hybrid was associated with physical power, robustness, maybe that untamed Luciferic strength made manifest.
It's like the myth is providing a spiritual narrative, a symbolic map for what might have been a real series of biological events, the meeting, clashing, and eventual blending of two distinct ancestral lines.
Exactly, using the language of angels and giants to describe something profound that happened deep in our ancestry.
Okay, so we have the philosophical framework with Steiner's triad, and we have this cosmic or mythological narrative layer with the Venusians and the Nephilim representing descents and
map. If the myths describe the cosmic drama, alchemy describes how that same process of transformation, descent, challenge, synthesis happens within the individual human soul, within consciousness itself. It's the psychological blueprint.
Right. It starts with the prima materia, the first matter.
Yes. The prima materia is the raw stuff you begin with. It's potential, but it's unformed, chaotic. It could be seen as the unrefined ego, the unconscious shadow material, everything within you that needs to undergo transformation to reach a higher state, like the Philosopher's Stone.
It's the starting point, the thesis, in a way, but it's inert until something acts on it.
And that action, that first crucial stage of the alchemical work, is the Nigredo, the blackening.
This sounds like the challenging part.
Oh, it absolutely is. The Nigredo is the stage of decomposition, dissolution, confronting the darkness within. The prima materia has to be broken down, killed, or mortified symbolically. You have to face your own limitations, impurities, the shadow aspects of your psyche. It's often described as a period of chaos, despair, and intense struggle.
That maps directly onto the Hegelian antithesis, doesn't it? The necessary friction, the struggle that drives change.
Perfectly. And the sources make this connection explicit. They point out how the Nigredo phase mirrors the universal archetype of sacrifice found in myths all over the world.
Like Christ's crucifixion.
That's the prime example given. Jesus' life and teachings before the Passion could be seen as the prima materia, the pure potential. The crucifixion itself, the suffering and death, that is the Nigredo. The ultimate dissolution of the physical form, the confrontation with darkness required for the later transformation.
And you see echoes elsewhere.
Definitely. Think of Odin hanging on Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 agonizing nights. Sacrificing himself to gain the wisdom of the runes, that's a Nigredo. Or Prometheus, chained to the rock, suffering eternally for bringing the fire, the Luciferic spark, maybe to humanity. The suffering is the price of the transformation.
So the core idea is that this descent into darkness, this struggle and limitation, the Nigredo, isn't a mistake or a punishment. It's actually a necessary functional step.
Exactly. It's the required friction. The raw potential of the cream of materia can't become something higher unless it goes through this process of being tested, dissolved, and purified by confronting its opposite, its shadow. You have to go down before you can go up, essentially.
That's a profound psychological idea. Do the alchemical texts suggest ways to actively engage with this, or is it just something you endure?
Historically, yes. Alchemists practice things like intense isolation, fasting, prayer, deep contemplation methods designed to break down the ordinary ego and force a confrontation with deeper layers of the psyche. Psychologically today, it's often interpreted as the conscious work of facing your own shadow, integrating the parts of yourself you deny or repress. The chaos is induced, or at least embraced, to catalyze growth.
Okay, so you endure the blackening, the dissolution. What comes next? How do you get to the synthesis?
After the darkness of Nigredo comes the light. The final stages in alchemy lead to the Rubedo, the reddening. This is the stage of perfection, of resurrection, where the transformation is complete.
Reddening. Why red?
Red symbolizes life, blood, fire, the successful union of opposites, spirit and matter, heaven and earth, king and queen in alchemical terms. It represents the culmination of the great work. The ultimate outcome is the creation of the rebus.
The rebus.
The rebus means the two thing, or dual substance. It's the symbol of the perfected integrated being, often depicted as androgynous, holding symbols of reconciled duality. It represents the fully awakened consciousness, the philosopher's stone itself, the Christic synthesis achieved within the individual.
And the connection back to the Christ story is...
It's the resurrection. Just as Christ, the prima materia, the potential, undergoes the crucifixion, Nigredo, the dissolution, and then rises again in a transformed, glorified body, Rubedo, the synthesis, the alchemist aims for a similar inner resurrection.
And the sources point out a fascinating link in Revelation, too.
Yes, this symbolic continuity is really striking. The Rubedo, the reddening, finds an echo in Revelation 19, verse 13, where the returning Christ figure is described as being dressed in a robe dipped in blood.
Blood symbolizing the sacrifice.
Exactly. It suggests the red of perfection isn't about escaping the struggle, but about transmuting it. The blood represents the life force realized through the endured suffering of the Nigredo. The sacrifice is integrated into the final perfected state. It's not erased, it's redeemed.
So the goal isn't purity by rejection, but integration. Enduring the friction until the very substance of your being is transformed and illuminated.
That's the essence of the alchemical path, and it mirrors the larger cosmic pattern we've been tracing.
Okay, we've got the philosophy, the myth, the internal process. Now, you argue this whole structure, descent, challenge, awakening isn't just Western esoteric thought, but a truly global pattern.
That's what the sources collectively suggest. We need to demonstrate that this isn't just a niche idea from Steiner or Van Tassel, but something fundamental to human consciousness, showing up in different forms across cultures and time periods.
Let's revisit that Lucifer-Christ dynamic again, then, as the engine driving this.
Right. It's crucial to see it not as simple good versus evil, but as a functional polarity. Lucifer represents the necessary impulse towards freedom, autonomy, maybe even rebellion. It provides the challenge, the test, the friction needed for growth, the antithesis.
And Christ represents the balancing, integrating force, the guidance that helps navigate that challenge without falling into chaos, the synthesis.
Exactly. Yeah, Christ provides the harmonization, the way to integrate spirit and matter healthily. And the shared symbolism here is just too potent to ignore.
Venus, the morning star.
Yes. The planet Venus. In Revelation 22:16, Jesus explicitly calls himself the bright morning star. But the name Lucifer itself comes from the Latin translation of a Hebrew phrase in Isaiah 14:12, Helo ben Shachar, meaning shining one, son of the dawn, also referring to the morning star, Venus.
So the same celestial body symbolizes both the initial descent or fall, Lucifer as the evening star setting, and the ultimate perfected ascent, Christ as the morning star rising.
It seems to encode the entire cycle right there in the sky. The light that descends into challenge and the light that rises in synthesis. Descent, right arrow, challenge, right arrow, guidance, right arrow, awakening. Now let's trace that pattern globally.
Okay, where do we start? The ancient Near East again.
Look at the Sumerian and Akkadian myths, particularly the Anunnaki. In their creation stories, humans aren't just born, they're made, often by mixing earthly clay with the blood or essence of a god.
That's direct divine descent into matter again. Hybrid creation.
Right. And often, humans are created specifically to serve the gods, to do their labor. That's the initial state, the thesis. The antithesis, the challenge, often comes later in the myths through conflict, rebellion, or the gods feeling threatened by human advancement, leading eventually towards greater human autonomy, or a new order, a synthesis.
And the Watchers from the Book of Enoch fit the Luciferic pattern even more directly.
Absolutely. These are angels who deliberately fall or descend. They take human wives, producing the Nephilim, but crucially, they also teach humanity forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, weapons, cosmetics, magic.
Knowledge that empowers but also corrupts.
Exactly. It's a Luciferic gift, brilliant, potentially transformative, but given prematurely before humanity has the wisdom to handle it. This descent and teaching, Thesis challenge, leads directly to worldwide corruption, the chaos, which then necessitates a divine intervention like the flood, the corrective guidance, to allow for a new beginning, synthesis.
Okay, shifting west again to the more formal esoteric traditions like Theosophy.
Blavatsky and Theosophy pick up the Venusian theme very explicitly, but they interpret the descent spiritually, not physically. Blavatsky wrote about the Lords of the Flame, beings led by Sanat Kumara, who descended from Venus millions of years ago during the early phases of human evolution, the Lemurian and Atlantean root races.
But their purpose wasn't physical hybridization.
No, it was mental and spiritual activation. Their descent was said to light the flame of Manas, the mind, in nascent humanity, which was previously operating purely on instinct. They provided the spark of self-awareness and intellect.
So the descent is still central, but the hybridization is at the level of consciousness.
Precisely. It's the infusion of higher mind, which itself becomes the challenge, the burden and gift of self-awareness driving all subsequent human evolution towards integration. Later traditions like Rosicrucianism continue this theme, focusing on initiates who guide humanity towards that alchemical integration of body, soul, and spirit.
Now let's jump to the Dharmic traditions, India. How does this pattern show up there? The sources mention Shukracharya.
This is a fascinating example. In Hinduism, you have guiding figures like the Saptarishi, the seven sages, who oversee cosmic epochs. They represent stable guidance. But then you have Shukracharya. Shukra is the Sanskrit name for the planet Venus.
So another Venus connection.
Yes. And Shukracharya is famous as the guru, the teacher, not primarily of the devas, the gods, the forces of order, but of the asuras.
The asuras. Aren't they usually considered the demons or anti-gods, the forces of chaos and challenge?
That's often how they're portrayed, yes. They represent ambition, material power, the necessary opposition in the cosmic drama. And Shukracharya, the Venusian sage, is the one who empowers them with knowledge, specifically Vedic knowledge and strategies.
Wait, so Venus, the light bearer, is guiding the forces of challenge. That seems counterintuitive if we map Venus to Christ.
But it perfectly confirms the functional nature of this archetype. It shows Venus isn't just about goodness. It's about providing the necessary impulse for the whole system to evolve. The asuras need to be strong opponents. They are the antithesis required to test the devas and the cosmos. Shukracharya empowers them precisely so they can fulfill their role in the dialectic.
Wow. So Venus provides the Luciferic spark, the knowledge needed for effective struggle, which ultimately forces the entire cosmic system towards a higher synthesis through conflict. That's brilliant.
It really is. And if you look at Buddhism, the whole structure is beautifully internalized. The challenge, the antithesis, is samsara itself, the cycle of suffering, desire, ignorance, and rebirth.
The state we're trapped in.
Right. The Luciferic principle here could be seen as the grasping, untamed ego that fuels samsara. The guidance, the Christic element, is the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha showing the path out. And the synthesis, the awakening, is nirvana, liberation from the cycle, the fully integrated awakened state.
It really does seem to be everywhere. You mentioned the Americas, too.
Yes, think of the major creator culture bringer deities. In the Andes, you have Viracocha, who emerged from Lake Titicaca, created humans, taught them civilization, established order, and then departed across the sea, promising one day to return. That's guidance followed by the promise of a future synthesis.
And the Aztecs had Quetzalcoatl.
Even more explicitly Venus-linked, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, is strongly associated with Venus. He descends from the sky, brings knowledge of agriculture, arts, the calendar. He establishes civilization. Then he departs, often amidst conflict or betrayal, again with a promise to return. It's the full cycle: descent, guidance through challenge, and the anticipated final synthesis.
Even Norse mythology fits, with Odin.
Odin's self-sacrifice on Yggdrasil is pure Nigredo. He endures extreme limitation and suffering, hanging for 9 nights, wounded by his own spear specifically to gain knowledge, the runes. It perfectly embodies that challenge, leading directly to awakening or illumination. The pattern holds. From the Near East to India to the Americas to Northern Europe.
The basic structure repeats. Higher consciousness descends, interacts with the material world, often creating a hybrid state or imparting knowledge. Thesis challenge. This interaction leads to struggle, chaos, or the need for integration. Antithesis. And finally, there's guidance or intervention leading towards an ultimate awakening or perfected state. Synthesis. The universality is pretty compelling.
It strongly suggests this isn't just coincidence, but a deep structure in human thought about our origins and destiny.
Okay, this brings us to perhaps the most speculative, but also potentially mind-bending part of the sources, trying to map this mythological
Modern humans, but explicitly connect it back to the Steiner Van Tassel model, acknowledging up front that this is symbolic interpretation using science metaphorically.
So lineage 1, the first Venusian descent, Venusian men, ex-Earth women, that gets mapped onto Neanderthals.
Symbolically, yes, representing that initial, powerful, robust spiritual infusion. The Luciferic spark may be immense potential, strength, but perhaps bound too tightly to a physical form that wasn't ultimately adaptable enough.
Then lineage 2, the corrective wave, Venusian women, ex-Earth men, mapped onto early Homo sapiens.
Correct, representing the more gracile, adaptable, perhaps more intellectually focused lineage. Symbolically, this is the guiding impulse, the Ahrimannic structure providing the balance, the adaptability needed for long-term success and expansion.
And lineage 3, the final synthesis, is us. Modern humans who we now know carry Neanderthal DNA mixed in with our predominantly Homo sapiens genome.
Exactly. The genetic evidence for admixture is undeniable. We are a biological fusion, a synthesis of these ancient lineages. That part isn't speculation, it's scientific fact. We carry the legacy of that blending within ourselves.
Okay, but now we have to tackle the big scientific counter-argument, or at least the complicating factor, mitochondrial DNA or mtDNA.
The mitochondrial Eve hypothesis. This is critical.
Because if the Venusian story, symbolically mapping onto Neanderthals and sapiens, suggests two major contributing lineages, doesn't the mtDNA evidence contradict that? The fact that all modern human maternal lines seem to trace back to one single Homo sapiens woman in Africa? Where's the Neanderthal mother line?
This is where the sources offer a really elegant, speculative resolution. The mtDNA evidence doesn't necessarily contradict the hybridization model. It actually reinforces the asymmetry of the contributions, which is precisely what the myth structure suggests.
Okay, walk us through that carefully. How does the absence of Neanderthal mtDNA support the model?
All right, let's break down the genetics. mtDNA is separate from the nuclear DNA in our chromosomes. It exists in the mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell. And the crucial thing is you only inherit it from your mother. Your father's mtDNA doesn't get passed on.
So it traces a purely female line of descent.
Exactly. Back and back through generations of mothers to eventually converge on one ancestral female mitochondrial Eve. And all studies confirm she was an African Homo sapiens. Now, scientists have sequenced mtDNA from Neanderthal fossils.
And it's different.
It's distinct. It doesn't match modern human mtDNA sequences. And importantly, we don't find surviving Neanderthal mtDNA lineages in people alive today. This initially led many to think that maybe Neanderthals and sapiens didn't interbreed successfully, or at least that any hybrid offspring could reproduce.
But we now know from nuclear DNA that we did interbreed and have fertile offspring. So there's the paradox.
Precisely. We have Neanderthal genes in our nuclear DNA, but not in our mtDNA. How could that be? The interpretation offered in the sources is that this perfectly supports an asymmetrical hybridization. Meaning that lineage 1, the Neanderthal contribution, symbolically linked to the Venusian male first wave, did contribute nuclear DNA, genes for traits like immunity, maybe robustness, etc., but their maternal lines, their mtDNA, eventually died out or were overwhelmed. While lineage 2, the Homo sapiens contribution, symbolically, the Venusian female corrective wave, provided the successful, enduring maternal lineage whose mtDNA survived and spread globally, becoming the foundation for all modern human mtDNA.
So the guiding, stabilizing force, lineage 2, provided the continuous maternal thread, the genetic carrier wave, you could say, while the initial powerful force, lineage 1, contributed traits, but its direct maternal line vanished.
Exactly. In the symbolic language of the myth, the enduring spiritual guidance came through the dominant maternal line, Homo sapiens Venusian female, while the Luciferic robustness of the first wave, Neanderthal Venusian male, was integrated into the overall genetic makeup and nuclear DNA, but didn't provide the main trunk of maternal ancestry.
That actually makes a strange kind of sense. It reframes an mtDNA evidence not as disproving the hybrid model, but as confirming its specific lopsided structure, which aligns with the narrative of a corrective second wave establishing dominance.
It turns the apparent contradiction into supporting evidence for the myth's deeper structure. Of course, we have to add the scientific caveat mentioned in the sources. The sample size of sequenced Neanderthal mtDNA is still relatively small. It's possible, though maybe unlikely now, that researchers could eventually find a surviving Neanderthal mtDNA line. But based on current data, the asymmetrical model fits remarkably well as a powerful metaphor.
It's a fascinating way to synthesize myth and genetics, even speculatively. Okay, we've traced this triadic pattern through philosophy, myth, alchemy, and even genetics. Where does this journey ultimately lead? What's the final synthesis?
The final synthesis, according to the sources, is encoded in the very concept of apocalypse, especially as found in the Book of Revelation.
Apocalypse usually conjures images of destruction, the end of the world.
Right, but we need to look at the original meaning of the Greek word apocalypsis. It doesn't mean destruction. It means unveiling or revelation. If we read it symbolically, archetypally, stripping away the literalism, the apocalypse represents the ultimate culmination of that Hegelian cycle we've been tracking. It's the grand synthesis of human development.
How does that map onto thesis, antithesis, synthesis?
Well, the thesis is the current state of the world, the existing order, often portrayed in Revelation as corrupt, materialistic, spiritually fallen. Think of it as the old earth, dominated by aromatic forces, structure without soul, technological control, spiritual blindness.
Okay, that's the starting point. The antithesis then must be
The chaos and conflict described in the apocalyptic visions, the trials, the tribulations, the plagues, the beasts, the cosmic battles. This is the ultimate Nigredo playing out on a planetary scale. It's the necessary friction, the breakdown and dissolution of the old corrupt consciousness to make way for something new. The challenge has to be total, to force a total transformation.
And the synthesis that emerges from this cosmic struggle.
That's the unveiling itself. The emergence of the new heaven and new earth, described so vividly in Revelation chapters 21 and 22, it's the perfected state, the ultimate integration, the triumph of the Christic principle. It represents the collapse of the old limited consciousness and the birth of a higher harmonized state for humanity and the planet.
So the goal isn't world destruction, but world transformation, integrating spirit with a renewed, perfected matter.
Exactly. And the proof that this is a deep archetypal concept, not just one religion's literal prophecy, lies in the fact that the same motif of a final synthesis, a restored or perfected world emerging from struggle, appears in virtually every major global tradition.
Right, you see it everywhere. In Judaism, there's the concept of the Olam Haba, the world to come, that follows the Messianic age.
In Islam, the idea of Jannah, paradise, often described as a transformed, perfected earth after the Day of Judgment. In Buddhism, you have the prophecy of Maitreya, the future Buddha, whose arrival will restore the pure Dharma and usher in an era of peace and enlightenment, the synthesis emerging from the struggles of samsara.
And in Hinduism, it's the Kalki avatar.
Yes, Kalki, the final avatar of Vishnu, is prophesied to arrive at the end of the current Dark Age, the Kali Yuga. He comes to destroy wickedness, end the chaos, and reestablish the Satya Yuga, the age of truth, righteousness, and perfection.
It's the same fundamental pattern again and again.
It really is. Every major system seems to encode this deep intuition. Humanity evolves through necessary periods of darkness, struggle, and challenge, guided towards an eventual state of integration, awakening, and renewal. It's the Hegelian dialectic playing out on the grandest possible scale, the ultimate expression of that descent, right arrow, challenge, right arrow, guidance, right arrow, awakening archetype we started with.
What an incredible journey. We've really woven together threads from such different realms: Steiner's philosophy, Van Tassel's contactee stories, ancient myths like the Nephilim, the inner work of alchemy, even speculative links to Neanderthal genetics.
It all seems to point back to that core triadic structure: Lucifer-Ahriman-Christ, not just as figures, but as fundamental forces driving evolution through thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
We saw how myths globally, from the Venusians to the Anunnaki, to Shukracharya guiding the Asuras, tell the same story of descent, challenge, and eventual awakening.
And how alchemy maps that internally, the necessary suffering and dissolution of the Nigredo being the required antithesis to achieve the integrated wholeness of the rebus.
Even the speculative detour into genetics, looking at Neanderthal admixture and the asymmetry of mtDNA inheritance, ended up serving as this powerful, almost poetic metaphor for how these opposing forces, robustness and adaptability, maybe Luciferic fire and Ahrimanic structure, get biologically integrated under a guiding principle.
Leading finally to that universal vision of a new earth, the Satya Yuga, the Olam Haba, Nirvidya, as the symbolic representation of the ultimate synthesis achieved after the Great Struggle.
So we've traced this pattern from mythological beings like Venusians and Watchers, all the way to genetic sequences and philosophical principles. It seems the core engine is this dialectic of spiritual development. And if that's the case, we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on.
Right. If these three great currents, the Luciferic impulse towards freedom and spirit, the Ahrimanic impulse towards structure and matter, and the Christic impulse toward integration and balance are the fundamental forces at play, maybe the real hybridization isn't just about ancient bloodlines or extraterrestrial DNA.
Maybe it's about something happening right here, right now, inside you.
Consider this. Are these three forces less about history and more about the active energies you have to navigate every single day? How much of your life is driven by that pure, potentially ungrounded Luciferic desire for freedom or escape? How much is locked down by Ahrimanic rigidity, routine, materialism, maybe fear?
And most importantly, how actively are you engaging in the work of mediation? How are you consciously trying to integrate that spark of freedom with the demands of reality? How are you cultivating that Christic balance within yourself to achieve your own personal rebus, your own inner new earth?
Perhaps the greatest challenge and the most profound synthesis isn't out there in the cosmos or buried in the past, but happening right now within your own consciousness. That's something to explore.